Throughout history, humankind believed in a multitude of truths.
The sun revolves around the Earth.
The Earth is flat.
Which were later proven by science to be inaccurate. George Bernard Shaw once said, "The only thing more dangerous than ignorance is false knowledge."
It is not a question of climate denial. It is a question of climate paralysis. That is
After all, the greatest problem solvers to have ever existed on Earth.
To fix you.
Welcome everyone to the first panel of our Carbon Markets Day, delivering concrete impact through carbon markets. We have an exciting speaker lineup who will be exploring the benefits and challenges of operationalizing Article 6 and how high-integrity carbon credits are generating measurable benefits for both local communities and ecosystems. Without further ado, I would like to invite our distinguished speakers and moderator onto the stage, please.
Welcome everyone to today's panel session on delivering concrete impact through carbon markets. I am the Director for Carbon Mitigation and also Director for Green Economy and Sustainability from the Singapore Ministry of Trade and Industry. And I drive Singapore's Article 6 bilateral implementation agreements with countries, and I also oversee the procurement of our Article 6 carbon credits on behalf of the Singapore government. I'm your moderator for today, and I'm really happy to have with me a distinguished set of panelists. I have first Mr. Frederick Teo. He is the CEO of GenZero. And we also have Juliana Bempah. She is the Principal Program Officer of the Environmental Protection Authority of Ghana. And finally, I have Mr. Sonam Tashi. He is the Director of Environmental and Climate Change under the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources of Bhutan. Now, let me kick off today's session by setting the stage a little bit and starting off with where Singapore stands today with regard to Article 6. We've signed 10 implementation agreements to date with other countries, and I would say that this includes Ghana and Bhutan, right? And we're both here with us today. Just recently, we announced that we contracted around 2 million tons of high-quality Article 6 compliant nature-based credits from projects in Ghana, Paraguay, and Peru. We've now launched our second request for proposals on 31st of October. This is just very recently. This time it's sector agnostic, and we welcome both nature-based and also tech-based credits from project developers. Now, why is Singapore pushing so hard on Article 6 partnerships? Well, there is a simple reality that we have to face. We are small, and we are densely populated, and we are resource constrained. We are not able to fully decarbonize ourselves by our own means. And therefore, we need to work alongside international partners from Bhutan, from Ghana, so that we can then use carbon credits as a complementary decarbonization pathway for us to meet our NDCs. But this is not just about Singapore. These partnerships will create win-win, mutually beneficial situations for all the countries that are involved by mobilizing climate finance for decarbonization that would otherwise not happen, because they generate real co-benefits for local communities and the environment. So today's discussion focuses on how we are turning Article 6 from concept to concrete impact. And we'll first share lessons from our journey from the initial phase where we started on MOUs, a signal of intent to cooperate, all the way to the signing of implementation agreements. And we'll then look at how this cooperation delivers tangible benefits for everyone involved beyond just better climate outcomes. Now, I'll start off the discussion today with Juliana and also Sonam, right? Singapore has signed implementation agreements with both Ghana and also Bhutan. We had one done with Ghana in 2024, and we also signed an implementation agreement with Bhutan in February this year. My question to you is, what were some of the key challenges that you faced in implementing Article 6 cooperation? Because we all know that Article 6 started way back in COP26, where there was an Article 6 rulebook that was established. But beyond that, there were no other details, right? And we were actually starting on a blank slate altogether. Even for Singapore, we didn't know anything else besides the Article 6 rulebook, which basically doesn't teach you how to operationalize it. So, how was the experience, and what were the challenges that Ghana and also Bhutan experienced, right, in having this sort of bilateral cooperation, not just with Singapore, with other countries as well? Maybe I'll start off with Sonam. Yeah.
Thank you, Baby. And just want to thank Singapore for inviting us. This has been an interesting journey for us. Article 6, COP26, you're referring to Glasgow, right? And it was a different weather from here. And I think I see my old friend and someone who co-facilitated Article 6 before me, Anshari over there. So Frederick, one of your key managers. So it was actually, let me also make it a bit of a personal touch. It was two of us actually deciding that, okay, let's discuss something possible, because in Glasgow, we got a feeling that the presidency will be able to pull off the Article 6 rule book, and Anshari and I think it was Ben and Josephs who were called in later, but the two technical people at that point, we just met and we said, look, let's take this forward. No, let's see, because we need to set an example in the market that the markets work. And by then, you also had these other initiatives, which again, I have to really thank Singapore, World Bank and AITA, the Climate Action Data Trust, the Climate Market Club and all. A lot of these discussions were taking place on how to move forward the Article 6 or the carbon market in the Paris world here. So that was the genesis of how the Singapore-Bhutan started. In the process, it was a learning curve. As Director Vivi was mentioning, if it was new for Singapore, it was really new in Bhutan, because only very few of us understood I mean, and some of the first things when you mentioned about let's get an agreement with Singapore, I mean, some of my bosses were saying, are you really sure, that you want to get into something which nobody knows right now, so one was that on the policy skepticism, we had to overcome that. We had to show that these things work. And then on the technical side was more challenging because limited experience. We really had to talk to a lot of legal firms to get views, and even then it was challenging because many of these firms were able to tell you the legal context of the language you're using, say what within Singapore, Bhutan were negotiating, but never really the country specific or the business case that is important for us to understand here. And then part of this journey of Article 6 was we also had to, at the same time, we had to ensure that we fulfilled participation requirements. And that was interesting. Some of us just decided that, look, the rule book is out. Let's start fulfilling para so and so of the Article 6. And these were the efforts made. And as part of that effort also, the National Registry of Bhutan, I mean, that time again, we took a leap of faith without any project. We just decided, let's build our own registry. Let's start moving this so that we don't wait for a centralized or a UNFCCC registry to come about and all. And then in this whole process was also the issue of capacity, of building up capacity. So for many of my young colleagues in the department, it was actually, I mean, on the job negotiations and really learning, So, and then the building of the infrastructure and all, setting up the institutional arrangements, it is something which we've just managed to settle many of these arrangements. So this journey of Article 6 with Singapore has been really a combination of compliance with the Article 6 rulebook, building up our capacity, and then again being able to identify projects and setting up the institutional arrangements within the country itself also. So this is just a brief summary of what has been done so far.
Thank you very much, Sonam. I will move on to Julie. We all know that Ghana is a front runner in Article 6. So when Singapore first started, we approached a few countries first, and Ghana was one of the few countries that we approached. So I wanted to hear Ghana's experience, knowing that you started really early in this journey. What went through in your mind when you decide to embark on Article 6 when no other country, or rather very few countries, started? And how do you eventually build up to the current state that it is, where you have now several partnerships with other countries?
Okay, thank you very much. I think Ghana's journey, or before I even start, let me say thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, for Ghana to share our insight into how we have started from 0 to 33. That's how I call it. Because currently we have a project pipeline of 33 between Ghana and Singapore. So when it comes to carbon market engagement, we had learned a bitter lesson, if I should put it that way, because the whole journey started within the CDM era, where Ghana performed quite poor. We couldn't take advantage of that market. And so immediately at Glasgow, when the Paris Agreement rule book and the Article 6 guidance was out, we sat down and said, hey, how can we take advantage of this market and we wouldn't be left behind as a country? And so immediately at Glasgow, we had discussions with the Singaporean team, and that is where this whole journey started from, in Glasgow. So after that discussion, we came back and said, well, we didn't perform well during the CDM era. Let's take stock and see what made us performed woefully. And so we sat down and decided to come up with policies, with rules. So we came up with the National Carbon Market Framework, which serves as a tool for operationalization of carbon markets in Ghana. So that was the very first step that we took. Because for an investor to come to your country and then you don't even have any guidance in terms of policy for the investor to look at and know that this is the route that this country is going, that it means that you are not ready as a country. So that's the first thing that we did. And so after we came out with the policy, the technical text, and also coming up with forms for it to make it quite easier for our investors, that document was put aside, and then we said, no, we need to develop a carbon market registry. So internally, we put ourselves together as a very small team, And then with our IT team, we guided the IT team and came up with our own carbon market registry. That wasn't enough. We also realized that, well, this is an international market. It's not only the domestic market that people can easily troop into our office and make inquiries. And so we decided to have a digital office where wherever you find yourself, you'll be able to access information on our project pipelines and then some of the processes that you'd have to go through to be able to be onboarded onto our carbon market registry. We had that also well accomplished before we came up with the carbon market office. So after the office was set up, now we were ready to roll out carbon market engagement in Ghana. So that was our journey. And then by 2022, we had also signed a letter of intent with the government of Singapore. And that was the beginning of our engagement, again, or that second step of our engagement with the government of Singapore. It didn't also end there. Then we went ahead to do the negotiation of the text for the IA, the implementation agreement. If you recall, we had series and series of meetings before we started with the technical negotiations. One good thing that we could also bring on board was that at the inception of we negotiating on the text, we had key institutions on board. For example, one lesson that I did like to share is bringing on board the foreign ministry when it comes to negotiating on the implementation agreement. We brought them on board quite early to negotiate on the text because these are between two different countries and they have to play a role. That notwithstanding, we also brought on board our legal team, which is very important. So for countries who haven't started negotiating on any bilateral agreement, one take-home here is that make sure you include or you involve your legal team right from the onset. And we also ensured that the relevant institutions were also brought on board when it comes to the negotiations of the text. So that took us about roughly 18 months to have that done. And then it had to go through the approval processes. So with the approval processes, the first stage is for the minister in charge of environment to endorse it. But prior to that, we had stakeholder consultation, which is also very key because you're going to engage stakeholders at every stage of the project cycle. And so we engaged the stakeholders right from the onset for them to understand what it means by carbon market, how we're going to do the authorization, the approval letters that we require from these institutions. We built their capacities, and so they understood it also right from the onset. Before the minister in charge of environment appended his signature, he approved it, and then it went to cabinet. The IA actually went to cabinet, also for cabinet to approve it, before we sent it to parliament for ratification. And it was ratified on, I think, 24th May 2024. That was when the IA between Ghana and Singapore was ratified. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, for bringing us through this journey. I think that, if I may summarize, some of the key points, including the last point about inter-ministry involvement. It's a whole of government effort to participate in Article 6 process. It's not just about the Ministry of Environment, because you need the line ministries to be involved, right? The line ministries, including the line ministries that are going to authorize and approve the projects. You need the Foreign Affairs Ministry to be involved because it's an international agreement. You need the legal team to be involved because they need to scrub through the legal text. It's a legally binding agreement. And so it takes the whole village, right, in order for the Article 6 agreements to be signed. So this is one of the key takeaways. But the second one that Julie mentioned about, and which Sonam had touched also briefly, is about how can you conduct this entire Article 6 collaboration in a business-conducive manner. So Julie spoke about the forms, you spoke about policies, you also spoke about how do you actually ensure that international partners can reach out to you, right, and by having a digital office. So my question then, turning to Fred, given that this point about business conduciveness it leads to this thing about private sector involvement in Article 6, which is very critical in order for us to operationalize Article 6. I have a question in relation to why is it that private investors should engage in the Article 6 process, particularly those that are in the carbon markets, and why did GenZero decide to participate in Article 6?
So as Juliana brought us on a little bit of a history trip, right, on our experience signing this implementation agreement with Ghana. First of all, may I just say Akwaba to all our Ghanaian friends. So that's one of the first words that I learned when I visited Ghana for our project in Kwahu. Now, when GenZero first participated in the Kwahu project, we started the engagement even at the feasibility study phase, even before the project was actually ready. This was even before there was such a thing as a CCP label for ARR projects. It was before we were clear that the IA will be signed. But why did GenZero want to do the project in Ghana and more importantly have confidence in Article 6? For that, I think we need to take one step back and look at the evolution of the carbon markets in the recent past. Now, we all know that there is a lot of volatility in the voluntary carbon market side. For the foreseeable future, we are probably going to have to depend on the compliance market, and for that we mean compliance programs like carbon credits that are meant to support, say, a carbon tax or ETS program, right, in order to be able to have better certainty of demand. In addition to some of the programs that are coming bilaterally between countries like Bhutan and Ghana and Singapore, we are also seeing the mandatory phase for CORSIA come into play in the next 1-2 years. So that basically means that compliance demand for credits are going to underpin the overall demand for credits somewhat. And if you look at the developments in the voluntary market, they are generally being supported by just a very handful of big buyers, like the tech companies in the US. Now, in some ways, if you can get the offtake from those companies, well and good. But then, if you want to depend on a secular trend around the tailwinds for industry, I think compliance markets, Article 6 type projects are likely to have better support in the near term. So that is the high-level explanation for why Article 6. Maybe the other thing about looking at how private sector parties will actually invest into countries that will produce such projects, I think there are a few factors that is important to consider. First of all is the presence of these regulatory frameworks and agreements, because it gives rise to greater confidence that at least the supplier country is in a position, first of all, like what the EPA has done, and they are highly technically competent on this issue around the provision of the LOA for corresponding adjustments. So if there is no regulatory framework for providing corresponding adjustments, whether it is from an accounting perspective, whether it is from a clarity around how they would price the CA admin fees, how they will look at the availability of providing these corresponding adjustments vis-a-vis their own NDCs, then it's very hard for you to invest because you don't know whether the CAs are going to come, right? So that's one. Secondly, I think it is important to find the right project types. Now, obviously, different countries will have certain preferences for different types of projects. And we need to be clear also that the project types are going to be acceptable to the buyer countries, because this is, after all, compliance, or for CORSIA for that matter. And so on that front, we look at a few things. One, has the buyer country and the host country whitelisted that particular project type? So in our case, for the Kwahu project, it is VM47 is about to hopefully get whitelisted, right? Have strong confidence that it will happen. Thank you, Wei Wei. Yeah, that's right, it is whitelisted. Secondly, we also look at whether the project type actually has an ICVCM CCP label, because that is also a mark of quality by many buyer and host countries. Thirdly, we ask also whether it is potentially CORSIA eligible. And if it is CORSIA eligible, then there is another avenue of demand to support that, all right? So that's about the project type. Next, it is important for us to be able to find good local partners. Now, in our case, we were quite delighted that we were able to work with Aja Capital, which is also headquartered in Singapore, but it had so many of its leaders that are already deeply embedded in Ghana and in Africa. So they are as local as it's going to get, right? And more importantly, we were working with conservation organizations like NCRC. And why is that important? Because the ability to get proper community engagements on the ground is highly critical to success. So in our case, for example, the design of our Ghana project had the establishment of these community management authorities. So essentially, these CREMAs are set up together with the local communities to be able to determine aspects around the project execution and also on issues like benefit sharing, which is highly important, right? Now, and then, of course, lastly, and there will be more and we can discuss this later, but let me wrap by also saying that it is also important for us to believe in the institutional strength as well as the policy certainty of the host countries that we are investing in. Because I think we have a lot of confidence in what Ghana brings to the table. Ghana has the technical competency, I think the policy certainty for us to actually make, as a foreign investor, to make the investments into Ghana because we know that they are going to be in this for the long term. They are serious about the carbon markets, and in that we have a trusted partner on the other side. So these are some of the factors that we think about, and then we can go into others if there are questions later.
Thanks, Fred. I wanted to hear a little bit more from your perspective on how governments have been enabling in terms of, helping you to participate in Article 6, particularly, I mean, from the Singapore government side, and also from the host country's perspective. How do you think that we can do more to enable more private sector participation? Because we all know that Article 6 will not happen if the private sector is not involved. And so what do you think are more things that we can do on those front?
I think credit to the Singapore government. I mean, the certainty of the policy direction on carbon markets have been particularly helpful for investors like us. And not just investors, but actually also other kinds of ecosystem players that are actually putting resources and investing into Singapore or working with the Singapore government and companies. For example, if we know that the Singapore government has that strong demand signal, like for example, in the case of the recent RFP, then there are many other companies that will come in and be confident about investing because, somebody is going to buy it, right? And supporting the RFP is not just the investors and the developers that are producing the carbon credits, but also many of the ancillary services that support such a process. Carbon rating companies, banks, the legal guys, right? So many other ecosystem players will be able to be developed to come in and support things like that. So the demand signal. The second important thing that governments can provide is clarity around pricing, right? Because, I mean, like with most economic activities, right, it's P and Q, price and quantity. You got to kind of like have a good sense of what the pricing and quantity is before you can make an investment decision. Now, the pricing, at least we have a good signal in the case of Singapore because there's a carbon tax price. And that is actually signaled in advance. So we have clarity that next year the government is going to raise it to 45 Singapore dollars per ton, and then by 2030 it's going to be somewhere between 50 to 80 Singapore dollars a ton. Now that gives us a lot of certainty about the kind of pricing support, right? Of course, what is the price that people will transact in order to fulfill that? Of course, that we have to make a guess, right? Whether it's a 10% discount to that price, 20% discount to the price, 30%, but at least there is an anchor price. And I think the third part of it is the administrative costs, especially on the side of the host country. So with Ghana, I think we have had very good discussions, and we have at least a good understanding of the policy and the way that Ghana, for example, is thinking about the implementation of CA fees, and that it is a very logical, systemic way of implementing it. There will be no cost shocks to investors that are coming in. And so these three things, demand signal, pricing signal about the credits, administrative cost certainty, would be quite helpful in guiding investment decision making.
Great. Thanks, Fred. That really summarizes, what are some of the key elements that governments need to put in place. I thought that maybe I'll just engage Sonam a little bit about how Bhutan is thinking about some of these things, particularly on the issue of pricing, and even for Ghana. As more partner countries or more countries enter into the Article 6 realm, there will be competition. It is not the same as when you first started, where there was just Ghana and then there was just a few other countries that were part of the Article 6 process. Which just means that because of this competition, is there a need to then constantly be looking at how you should be pricing or repricing, your administrative fees, your corresponding adjustment rates, so that you can be competitive in the market?
I think, in fact, I wanted to ask about this. Thank you for bringing it up. When Frederick was mentioning about these three elements, the demand signaling, the administrative costs, which is largely seen as a host party, but the key is the pricing, right? And Singapore has this clarity in terms of the carbon tax, which Frederick mentioned. But see, if you go beyond and look at the overall carbon market, and including what's happening in those two rooms called 6.2 and 4. Everybody talks about they want the highest integrity. There's a review, or people have reviewed the initial reports, the synthesis report and all this. And everyone is talking about, oh, you know, that there's some no clarity, there's some question of integrity. And it's almost like if you oppose that, you're considered to be a non-compliance with the integrity options. I mean, not options, but the environmental integrity. And this is a concern as a potential seller country, an exporter, that we have that people expect the creators of the assets, the private sector, and the host country where these projects are being held to uphold the highest environmental integrity. And this, we are okay with it. But the issue is this: the price and the demand signaling is not adequate in the market, you know. I mean, you want me to supply the highest quality, I need to know what is the minimum carbon price, you know. And this is what we are not hearing, you know. And this is a good thing. In Singapore, you have the tax, and as Frederick was mentioning, now whether people will transact, that's a different issue that we have to deal with. So this is a concern for many of us, you know. You want the highest integrity, you want the most credible quality, you want us to comply with all the labels on earth, but please tell us what the price is. And this is something which we are not hearing from the market, you know. And the other challenge in this carbon pricing is also this, something which I think we didn't think in the Article 6 room negotiations, but the blurring of the lines between the voluntary or independent standards and the compliance, you know. We are getting requests from project developers that they want, and I'll tell you the exact words, they want authorized credits or they want adjusted credits, you know. But when we tell them if there is an authorization required, there will be a corresponding adjustment fee, then we get a different response. So again, these again from the implementation in the market that's going on. So the carbon pricing, yes, if you ask me, I want what the EU ETS has, right? 80 euros, but is it possible? I don't think so. There are certain reasons behind that, right? So I think when we discuss about carbon pricing, this is something which we really need an honest discussion and a clarity from the market, you know, and not just for, say, a country like mine or host government that is a potential exporter, but even for the private sector, because, and I'll tell you, as part of this implementation agreement, the negotiation, the discussion, say, within the government of Bhutan, when I spoke to my former trade and industry colleagues about, you know, mitigation co-benefits and economic diversification and the potential of this agreement, and I was telling them that, you know, but the Article 6 has these requirements, and my colleagues in the, my former colleagues in the trade and industry department, what they told me was this, you know, I mean, who's going to do this? You know, I mean, we can just do it under the existing foreign investment rules. You know, we can go get a Singapore company to invest in a manufacturing, and then that's it. You know, so what I'm just trying to tell you is the enormous existing challenges. A lot of progress has been made, but there has to be clarity, which I think Frederick has mentioned. Right, the price signaling is important. Otherwise, we are going to get these kind of responses. You know, people will say, well, this kind of project, let me just do it under the existing rules, you know, that are already there for investors. I mean, why take up this this additional climate work, you know, for when you don't have uncertainty in the market? So this is from, I mean, our experience so far. I mean, but this is not to say that we are going to undermine the cooperation in Singapore. It's important. I think this is what we're looking forward to, and we're using the Singapore agreement as a test case of really signaling to the market that no, this is the minimum kind of benchmark price and so on.
I think at the center of what all of you are saying is predictability, right? Because, you know, countries and the private sector needs predictability in order to participate in something, because there's a lot of risks that are involved, right, in developing the projects. Yeah.
Okay, I think our case is not so different from the kind of explanation you heard from Sonam. But I think I would also want to touch base on VM0047. During our very last joint committee meeting, it was approved, and very soon it's going to be put on our website, both the Singaporean website and our website as well. So it's been accepted already, and it's going to be listed very soon. So when it comes to issues of pricing, I think it's one of the tricky areas. That's how I call it, because for us, we are only required to regulate the market and not to be really engaged in pricing. However, how do I ensure that high quality credits are created without me knowing the pricing that it comes with? That is the challenge. And so we're not directly engaged in the pricing. Usually you have the project developers and the buyers signing an emission reduction purchasing agreement, and then it's between them. They don't really disclose to us what the pricing is. And this is something that we don't really, we are not so happy with, if I should put it that way. We are not so happy with, but that is what is actually existing. And so we only make sure that when it comes to the administrative costs, EPA takes the administrative charges, and all the fees and charges, just as said, is in our framework. We've already put every detail in there. And it's supposed to be updated every 2 years. So hopefully this year, we're going to put the new fees and charges on our website for people to get to know the new fees and charges. When it comes to the share of proceeds, we have made a proposal to our ministry for it to be tabled out to Parliament, for it to be accepted. And the proposal was that whatever proceeds that comes out, we're going to have a corresponding adjustment fee of 5%. And this corresponding adjustment fee per ITMO that is issued, we're going to add 5% to it. And with this, we have a proposal that comes in the form of 40% that would go to the ministry that the mitigation activity emanated from. And then we have 30% of those proceeds going to the Ministry of Finance for it to be reinvested into other climate change and adaptation projects. And then we have 20% that we plan to take to other startup projects, emission mitigation reduction projects. So we intend to give this 20% to them for those startups, because we realize that there are a lot of startup businesses that are interested in going green, going into carbon projects, but do not have the needed startup capital. And so we intend to support such startup businesses with those funds. And then we have 10% that will be going to the Ministry of Environment and the EPA to support an administrative charges and then other administrative costs. So that is the proposal that we've tabled out to Parliament. Yeah.
So before Fred jumps in, I just like to explain what Julie is talking about. Under Singapore's implementation agreements, we are committed to have 5% share of proceeds that goes towards the host country's adaptation funds. Or in this case, what Julie has highlighted, which I'm hearing for the first time, to be honest, is that there's a 4-3-2-1, sort of like a proportionate distribution.
It's
right?
just a proposal. It's
right?
not been accepted yet.
That Ghana is considering, right, to distribute the share proceeds, which sounds like a really innovative approach to me. And this is something that, you know, we would like to work with other host countries to see how that 5% share proceeds can go towards benefiting the host countries directly. So I'll now invite Fred to share. You wanted to say something?
Yeah. I think on this question of pricing, this issue around what is fair pricing for carbon credits have come up quite a lot, especially in Article 6 type projects. Maybe I offer a few perspectives for us to mull over. The first is, how do you define what is fair? Now, there is some inclination, obviously, that you want to maximize the pricing and to make sure that as much of the economic value goes back to our host countries. I think that is a fair intuition, right? And the instinct is right. The question here really is that there are many other ways to capture value. There's beyond just necessarily a question of price. Because when it is overly expensive, it may also potentially deter buyers and investors. So we have got to be careful around how we layer on these cost expectations. But let me explain there are about other ways in which there could be benefits to supply countries. First of all, it is important when we are talking about what kind of projects we do for Article 6 to make sure that the underlying activities actually are helpful to our host countries. And host countries actually have a lot of, in fact, they are in the best position to tell you whether they need clean cooking capabilities, more investments into renewables, or is it in reforestation, protection of forests, sustainable agriculture, whatever those things might be. Now, subject to the fact that they can meet the environmental integrity standards for the carbon credits, we should pay quite a lot of attention to what is actually needed to support sustainable development in our host countries. Some of the projects that we have been engaging in have very strong developmental side benefits as well. For example, if we think about our project in Ghana, the planting of shade trees is what provides us with the ARR carbon credits. But the shade trees are being planted over cocoa plants, which in a sense, by providing that shade, you improve about 20-30% of the productivity of the cocoa. And therefore, the smallholder farmers benefit by having higher levels of income. Now, they are also going to have the same incentives to protect the shade trees because that helps them with higher income. And that also means that your reforestation efforts are likely to be successful because your smallholder farmers are going to protect your trees as opposed to cutting them down for firewood. If we look at our rice project in India, where we are trying to encourage alternate wetting and drying, it is a way of not just simply avoiding methane emissions from more decomposition by flooding the water, flooding the fields all the time, but it is by intermittently flooding, right? So they call it alternate wetting and drying. What you do is that you save about like 30% to 40% of water. You use less water. You reduce the methane emissions. But more importantly, in Asia, where we are growing our rice is increasingly water stressed. If the farmers don't learn how to use less water to grow the same amount of rice, we are also going to have a food resilience, food supply type problem. So in many of these ways, carbon projects are a way of driving money into the local communities, into supporting the local communities, but there are many more benefits than just simply issuing carbon credits, getting money from the carbon credits. It is also about ensuring that the way of life, the economic activities that are on the ground are protected, right? So that's another thing. Now, obviously, benefit sharing becomes very, very important. And so therefore, today, there isn't really a universal standard as to how much benefit sharing is sufficient. It would be good if there is increasing clarity around how we should go about thinking about benefit sharing, at what level is appropriate and important. Now, to that extent, one of the issues that often come up is that what happens if carbon credits become something that is more of a tradable commodity, and there is a lot of secondary trading, okay? So the initial part of it, the money goes back to the developer and to the local community, right? But if it is subsequently sold, resold, sold, resold, sold, resold, right? Then there might be a lot of money generated, but that money might not be able to go back to the local community. So there needs to be some clarity around how the rules are, whether we want to have increasing traceability, certain rules around how we would engage in carbon trading going forward that would be somewhat protective of the local communities. But that said, if we want to deepen the carbon markets, if we want to be able to get good pricing at the start, which is the easiest for us to channel money into the local communities, we have to embrace the deepening and the liquidity in the carbon markets that come with secondary trading. And one of the best ways of making sure that the money goes back to the local community is to do it upfront. Because I must say that you can do all kinds of traceability and subsequent processes, but it is never going to be as straightforward as making sure that the money goes back at that point in time, and that's good enough. All right? Now, because if you think about it, today, let's just say if I sell you a car, I've sold you the car. A car typically will go down in price, but let's just say if it continues to go up in price, right? The original seller or the car manufacturer cannot come back to all the other people and say, sorry, can I take a piece of all your subsequent revenues? That is going to be quite difficult in practice to do. So what we need to make sure is that the first price is a fair price, is a good enough price, and then we move on. And if there is increasing liquidity in the market, there are more activity going on, then there is more economic benefits going through new projects, rather than worry about whether the original credits were sold or resold appropriately.
Right, thanks, Fred. I think you have waded into the second section of this particular section where we're going to talk about how carbon markets or carbon credit projects are going to bring about tangible benefits to not just the local communities, but on the whole, to the host country. And also, I think it's just quite straightforward for Singapore. We are looking to using the credits or ITMOs that are being generated under Article 6 towards our NDCs. But I think we want to hear probably now from the host countries as to what sort of concrete benefits are you already seeing? Particularly, of course, Ghana had started in this journey quite early. What are you seeing on the concrete benefits on the ground that's materializing as a result of Article 6? And for Bhutan, what are you seeing, or what do you look forward to seeing in terms of concrete benefits, tangible impact for the local communities, and also for the country on the whole? Julie.
All right, thank you once again. When it comes to concrete benefit of carbon market engagement, I think it's quite enormous. If you look at the value chain, right from onboarding of project till implementation, till you do the issuance and transfer, it's really huge. So on our end, what we started with, we realized that this entire ecosystem is quite new to a lot of people. So what we started with is to partner with Gold Standard, because when it comes to project development, I'm going to give you very practical examples here. When it comes to project development, documentation, that's where the whole carbon market architecture begins from. We realized that as a country, we didn't have a lot of local people being part of this ecosystem. And so we partnered with Gold Standard to start giving training to the youth, more specifically, and to other interested parties. So we trained them. And as of last week that all the sessions came to a close, we had trained about 23 experts to be able to engage in project development documentation. So we have trained a couple of people, and they've started taking up some jobs. Because when it comes to more specifically issues of conducting validation and verification, we don't have local experts to be able to do that. And we thought it very wisely and included that as part of our carbon market framework, that as a project developer, external one, the moment you come into the country to engage in carbon market transactions, you would need to bring on board a local expert when it comes to validation and verification exercises. It's mandatory. And we've also gone ahead to do training so that our people, the young ones, are equipped right from the onset to be able to take up these jobs. Another step that we're also looking at is accreditation. And so we're going to continue engaging Gold Standard and hopefully Vera to be able to assist us in this regard. Yeah, that's one of the major things we've done. Again, when we come into other technologies, such as the clean cooking space, we have quite a number of technologies and then other fuels that are being used. We're also training a lot of people within this regard to be able to take up jobs. Because the moment we have carbon market engagement in Ghana, it means it's another avenue that jobs can be created, green jobs can be created. And so other people are also being trained when it comes to clean cooking, when it comes to solar technologies, the manufacturing aspects, the installation, and then even when it comes to data collection for those who are engaged in verification and validation. We're training a couple of people. And then when it comes to also the LPG fuel and then also electricity, we also realize that even though the technology is there, penetration is quite low. We have just about 36% or 37% of households who are using cleaner fuels like LPG or even electricity. And so we're also looking at how we can beef up these numbers and ensure that jobs are created within this space. And then we're also looking at how these fuels and technologies can also be accessible within the rural areas. And so on the whole, doing a rough estimate of our NDC 3.0, we're looking at how we can create about 5 million jobs for our youth and others who are interested within this carbon market ecosystem. Thank you. 5 million jobs.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Julie. I think it's very inspiring because, you know, what I'm hearing is that there, at the get-go, there's been a lot of thinking around localization, jobs creation, and upskilling or capacity building to make sure that this all works in Ghana's favor when it finally comes to international collaboration with other countries, including Singapore. So, you know, for Bhutan, turning to you, Sonam, you know, what are your thoughts about, you know, how Bhutan can potentially benefit from this quite concretely?
I mean, in addition to what, Julian, right? What she mentioned, jobs and so on, let me not repeat that. But let me just add to, what our colleague from Kenya mentioned, that what we're looking at Article 6 is as one of the means of enhancing domestic productive capacity in the country. That's why when I'm saying the blurring of climate and trade. For instance, we have a Singapore company that's, I mean, hopefully should come under our implementation thereafter. They are exploring coffee plantation in Bhutan, you know, so a country that really doesn't grow coffee. I mean, we have a zero history of coffee. I mean, these are good examples. The same company is looking into investments in solar energy. Again, so again, another example of how we can enhance domestic productive capacity. Then also there are others, and this is where in the CDM era, the government was active building the bigger hydropower plants, but what the emphasis on private sector in Article 6 is it's really creating new opportunities. For instance, I mean, other than what I just mentioned, there are some other civil society also, and then private sector engaging in smaller projects like cook stoves, I mean the traditional ones. There's also in something called biodigesters, and then there's also an interesting initiative that is transboundary initiative called Mountains to Mangroves. It's planting 1 billion trees across the South Asian subcontinent. I mean, is it 1 billion? But it's a huge number that I need to check my numbers again. Yeah, so this is where we are seeing about how we enhance our domestic or increase or build domestic productive capacity, at the same time enhance regional cooperation through a lot of these climate activities, and also in the energy sector, where again we are looking at how the questions of additionality and everything has to be looked into, but we're also seeing through the carbon markets, can we keep building on, see, the clean energy export grid that Bhutan and India are part of, you know, and to see how we can work together, because, you know, what we say is that mitigation is the best adaptation, you know, and then, and also through the carbon revenues that we expected, we have a Bhutan Climate Fund, and I think just to answer to Frederick, in many months when you met and when you asked us in that meeting with investors, is the Bhutanese government willing to put something? Finally, the answer is yes, you know, from a no to yes. So there's a skin in the game, so just to let you know. So we have the Bhutan Climate Fund that's supposed to aggregate the carbon credit sales and invest in smaller mitigation projects and all, you know, or to help investors offset risk and all. So these are some of the, I mean, I would say the benefits that the government is also looking into. And also just want to quickly touch upon, if maybe just another minute, on what Frederick mentioned about the carbon assets and all, right? About the pricing, and then about, you know, the secondary market and all. Now, I mean, that's a very important point that Frederick raised, because when we talk about access benefit sharing mechanisms and all, is and I think Frederick has offered a way out of this, you know, because the question we are facing is, once a secondary market develops, what do we do about that, you know? And no, just want to appreciate what and to thank Frederick for what he mentioned. This also brings us to a whole part of this discussion back home. We also, I mean, now this gets a little bit political, technical, but let me not really, but just want to sound it off. The discussion also on this whole benefit sharing and what happens was, the question we were also faced was this, how is, say, my department that took the lead in this defining carbon assets, you know? And we told them, look, this is a central banker's job and the treasury's job, you know. The question of, is it a commodity or is it a financial asset class, you know? And then this, where the government or the treasury and the central bank defines this carbon credit, has interesting implications on even benefit sharing and all, you know, in terms of the regulatory oversight, and then how do we regulate those kind of assets and all. So I just wanted to just mention this as part of this whole discussion, because when we were discussing this was a question that we were being asked, you know, is it a commodity or is it a financial asset class, you know? Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah. If I can also respond a little bit more onto this idea of how we deliver concrete impact. I think the way that investors and project developers design projects, the questions that we ask, going to be very important in whether they are able to deliver impact or not. I mean, we have already had discussions around benefit sharing and all that. I won't belabor the point, other than to say that there are some best-in-class practices that are emerging. For example, the ability to be able to have some set-aside revenues for benefit sharing and to agree on that upfront and what that percentage sharing might be. The idea that if, for example, returns actually ramp up quite unexpectedly, so suddenly you become extremely profitable, that there are also mechanisms where we increase the level of benefit sharing if there is increased product profitability. On the issue around actual benefits on the ground, right? I wanted to highlight one important aspect for us to understand. Now, of course, we are talking about Article 6 projects. So these come with corresponding adjustments. So in other words, if the host country is issuing corresponding adjustments on those credits, then they are obviously deducted from the national budget. Yeah? Okay. But projects can coexist both in the voluntary and the compliance space. So let's just assume if we are investing into a project that is meant to be helpful to a host country, and of course we want to have some Article 6 credits come out, but it doesn't need to be all 100% of that project. For the part of the project, so let's just say if it yields 1 million tons, and you issue 500,000 tons with corresponding adjustment and 500,000 tons without, that means it's going to the voluntary market. Then actually that 500,000 tons that go out is debited, but the 500,000 tons without CA is directly contributing to the host country. So this is also one way for us as we are designing our projects to be able to say, hey, look, carbon projects are not just about getting carbon credits to go and help rich companies offset their emissions. It is a way of actually driving money to invest into real capabilities in host countries, right? And the ones that come out for the voluntary market will directly contribute to the carbon bank for the host country. That is also an important thing for us to understand.
Thanks, Fred. That is a very useful model to share. I mean, it relates to carbon abatement sharing, which means that it's not all the ITMOs, not all the credits are going to be ITMOs, right? They can be retained by the host country, and that can help towards their NDCs as well. I am going to move into a bit more of concrete examples, because I think the whole idea of this panel is to talk about really concrete benefits that's come about as a result of Article 6. And I have a concrete example, and Fred is on the panel on the Kwahu project. This is a project that the Singapore government has contracted as part of our RFP, and I'm going to invite Frederick and also Julie to talk about the benefits that's come about as a result of this project. I know that Fred has touched on it a little bit just now, but I thought that we can do a bit more of a deep dive.
Sure.
Thank you.
So this project, I think in the first phase will probably be reforesting an area around 30 to 50,000 hectares. That's already a considerable percentage of Singapore actually, right? It's quite a big area, south of the Lake Volta. So that has been degraded by deforestation. So other than the environmental benefits I mentioned just now about the economic benefits to the smallholder farmers, I will mention a third point, which is about the jobs that will be created through these activities. Now, we expect that in the next few years, this will directly create about 1,000 jobs, of which about 20% of those jobs are targeted to be filled by women in that particular area. And I think in some of these projects, we constantly see that we ask questions as an investor around the number of local jobs that will be created. In our project, for example, in Paraguay, which is in one of the poorer areas of Paraguay in the southeast, our project there on sustainable forestry is expected to create something like 800 jobs already. I think 800 jobs were already created last year. Quite a lot of them are filled by women, usually in nursery type jobs. And then probably up to about 3,000 jobs in the next few years as the project is actually scaling up. Similarly, in Vichada province, where we have another project in Colombia, which is another slightly lower income area province, right? A poorer province within Colombia. The jobs there that are being created are generally above the minimum wage. And we generally ask for that to actually happen as well. So we are not just creating the jobs, we are creating well-paying jobs. Because as you bring in international investments, we can have an influence over the level of pay and all that, because we are talking about accessing international markets. So the more open that host countries are to accessing international finance and international carbon market cooperation, right? Then the possibility of bringing in quality jobs, high-paying jobs into regions that really can benefit from that kind of carbon finance and sustainable development will be there. So that is some of the things that we are doing, not just in Kwahu, but in many other regions around the world.
Thanks, Fred. Now, that is from the investor's perspective. We really want to hear from the host country. How has that sort of benefits trickled down to the individual level, or at the community level and individual level? Is the impact being felt by the people?
Okay, so thank you very much once again. I think I would just add to what Fred said. I think if you look at the Kwahu landscape, and that's where I actually come from. Oh. Yes. There are some areas that have actually been degraded vastly. And so with their projects, they are looking at about 50,000 hectares to ensure that it comes back to its original state. We're trying to see how they can do well to let it come back to its original state. And because of the way that the area is degraded, it makes a lot of farming activities also quite difficult. And so with this project coming in, it's going to also help them, the women over there, it's going to create a lot of jobs for them. Because you realize that most often than not, when it comes to such projects, is the women who get the opportunity to grow seedlings, and then they go ahead to do the planting. And so majority of women within the Kwawu landscape area would get some jobs within this project implementation stage, which is a very good thing for us, those of us who come from that area. And so with the status of this project, they've already been onboarded within the CMO, and stage A approval has been given. They already have their letter of support from us, and then, letter of intent from us, and then letter of support from the Singapore side. Yes.
If I may add, to very quickly to what Julie is saying, some of these different project types can actually add on to each other to be highly complementary. Before we started our panel, Julie and I had a conversation around the importance of clean cooking in many parts of Africa, which is something that I think we support quite strongly. Now, if you imagine that in addition to some of these reforestation and forestry type jobs, which can employ women, but if you add to that projects that can allow them to actually have more time. For example, if we introduce clean cooking capabilities, that means that the cook stoves are more efficient. They spend less time having to go and find firewood, less time cooking because things get hotter faster, right? And then they will have more time to be able to find productive work that can add income for the families. But if the women are spending a lot of their time cooking, getting firewood, and being stuck in the kitchen, then it's not good from an overall socioeconomic point of view. And in addition to that, I think it's quite clear that actually, female empowerment in developing countries have many, many benefits to household outcomes. And one of the outcomes is actually around education for their children and also healthcare. So that if they're not stuck in a smoked out kitchen, then their health outcomes are also going to be better for themselves and their families. So as we layer on many of these things, I'm actually minded to believe we are not just asked to be finance professionals or investment professionals. We are all asked now to be sustainable development professionals. We got to have a proper theory of change of what will make sense to be able to help create a more sustainable future for the many communities that we are working with, both on the supply side and on the buyer side, right? So that we create a much better world together and we use carbon finance as the means to achieve it.
And maybe to add to what Fred just said, now we're looking at how we can use more improved cooking technologies. And hitherto, you find a lot of children also working long distances. Aside the women working long distances, you find children also working long distances to fetch firewood, and some of them don't even go to school because they are going to fetch firewood for the home. And so once we have these improved technologies, improved fuel, and then they are able to attend school at regular times, while their mothers are able to save a lot of time, and then they are also not exposed to a lot of smoke from the cooking practices. Yes.
Thanks, Julia. Before I get Sonam online, I just like to share a personal reflection. In fact, when I did some of the site visits for clean cooking, my personal reflection is some of those co-benefits may actually outweigh the carbon reduction, that we are seeking. I mean, we look at carbon markets, of course. We are looking for it most. But when you visit, a site where you visit a project, I think what is really moving is really the benefits that can be derived by the local community. And that is something that you can't see on paper. You have to be there to experience it yourself and know that there are so much benefits, including what we mentioned about health benefits, educational benefits. These are all amplified. And when you have different project types that come together, they actually have a compounding effect and benefits for the community. Over to you, Sonam. I know you want to say something.
No, just a quick question to both Juliana and Frederick. When you're mentioning about attracting international carbon finance and all, and especially to GenZero as an investor, if I may say it that way, I mean, what do you look into a host country, right? Because attracting finance is, it requires, again, certain reforms, right? So besides, say, Article 6 compliance rules, we need to, like, we need to have a green taxonomy, your financial system may have to be a little bit open, capital controls may have to be reformed and all. So given that when you investors want guarantees, right? And then you get the World Bank involved, and MEGA gets involved, and then the cost goes up and all. So just want to know, say, from your experience, when you look into this international carbon finance, what could be a more efficient way of delivering, right? Because if you wait for these big reforms, the small projects that, say, what Juliana was mentioning are going to get left out, right? Because, and see, even an investor based in Singapore or New York will be wondering, I mean, how do I deal with cook stoves? You know, I mean, for them, they're looking at big projects. So,
Well, I think that sometimes you don't need big grand gestures, to be honest. I think that at core is the ability to have an open dialogue and communication around problems as they arise. Because Sonam, to be honest, right, when we started the project with in Ghana and we made the initial investments, there were no asks of the Ghana government to say, you need to change this, you need to do that. We take it as it is and we say, look, does this work for us? And we try to make it work, right? And what I think is important is to develop a constructive partnership between governments and private sector players so that as problems come up, we have a way of being able to discuss it reasonably with each other. That is one. But if I think about practical things that can be done without grand gestures, right? Things like, for example, if over time we find that governments, for example, do not reverse the letters of authorization for corresponding adjustments, then the cost for insurance to guard against that risk will go down. Because increasingly, the insurers will then say that, hey, look, actually governments don't really go about reversing this. Especially even when they are under pressure on their NDCs, they don't. Then actually for the private sector, this is a very strong signal. No change in regulation needed, nothing. Just by the behavior of governments to say, I'm consistent. When I say I will issue, even if it's going to be a little bit more difficult as time passes. Then that way, it actually, from the private sector perspective, lowers the cost of insurance. I'm just giving one practical example of how consistent policy execution can help us.
Well, thank you very much. I think it would have succeeded if one of my panelists actually starts asking the other panelists questions. But my job, really, I think, usually what I do is I would like to engage the audience. I don't believe in just having a discussion amongst ourselves, and I think it's started to get exciting. So I'm going to open up, to the floor for questions. Please state your name and organization. Maybe this gentleman over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Glenn Kwabnajima. I'm from Ghana, the Jospon Group of Companies. My question goes to Frederick, my friend. In fact, I really like the point of fair pricing right from the onset. However, you all know the complication that goes where there are intermediaries and there are no disclosures in terms of the primary user at the buying point. And so within the fair pricing at the initial stage, would you support the idea that there should be a policy that when you intend reselling it, the excess revenue must be disclosed so that within the policy, that policy will also capture the sharing of that proceed. Other than that, with the fair pricing, for sure, at the initial stage, the price ends up to become fair so that the project becomes sustainable. But you end up, the person who develops it, who takes that fair pricing, ends up losing somehow, some way to the third buyer, fourth buyer, or the fifth buyer. So would you support the idea of having a policy by, let's say, host countries, and by so doing, you disclose, and there should be a proceed of the sharing method of that proceed?
Okay, so if the question is, do we need better disclosures on the purchasing and the use of carbon credits, I'm supportive. Because for many corporates and governments or whoever that's using or retiring carbon credits, it is vitally important for you to disclose what credits you are retiring, where are they from, what kind of carbon rating they might have, right, in order to be quite transparent. Now, on the question of pricing, I must say that, and disclosure of pricing, I would say that I would be generally supportive with some caveats. Okay? Now, why do I say that? If right at the start you are disclosing the pricing and that is the done deal, to be honest, if right now you are transacting on an open market platform like a carbon exchange, the pricing is transparent. And I think that that is actually very good and proper. Okay, very, very good. Now, in subsequent trades, then I worry about whether it creates a misunderstanding. And what do I mean by that? In standard economics, price is a signal of scarcity, not quality. In many other aspects of our lives, if you can buy your fruits for cheaper, if you can buy your car or your home for cheaper, if you can buy anything that you need, right? Your washing detergent, your bread, your eggs for cheaper, we would all agree that that's a good thing, right? We will all agree that. But when it comes to carbon credits, some people don't think so. Some people will say, the more expensive, the better. Because why? You want the buyer countries to pay, you want the corporates to pay, you need to punish them for emitting. It becomes a little bit vindictive in the language. And part of the idea around this disclosure and subsequent rounds of secondary trades is actually meant to continue to extract, right? Now, today, if I bought a house, or rather I have a house that is 50 years old, okay? Odds are it has changed hands many times. When it was first developed, it probably sold for about $10,000, $20,000. And then subsequently, the next person bought it for 50, the next person bought it for 100,000, and then after that, $1 million, and maybe now it's worth $10 million. Can the original developer go back to the last buyer at $10 million and say, sorry, I think I needed something because why did I sell it 50 years ago at just $10,000? I think it's going to be a bit difficult. But if we are mature about that, then actually in the case of my example on the house, all the sale pricing, who bought, how much you borrow money from, actually in most countries, that's transparent and publicly disclosed, right? So it is a question of what we are using the information for, and I think we got to just be very careful that we don't misunderstand and suddenly, go the wrong way with all the disclosure. But in general, am I supportive of greater disclosure? I am.
Gentlemen and ladies, thank you really for this session. It's really fruitful. My question, who decide the price? Because when you see who decide the price for carbon market ton, for example, when you see Ghana, for example, the price $20. Many countries 20, Brazil 30, Europe $90. So who decide the price? And why it is not fixed price?
Fixed price
Yeah,
all over.
yeah. And other question, do you think in the future it will be in global market, in a global market for stock market? The people, the normal people can share and this?
I think
Thank
so.
you.
I think so. Can I address this question? Okay. One of the first projects I did when I was back at Temasek was to establish the carbon exchange in Singapore. Okay. And the logic for why we wanted to support the establishment of a carbon exchange in Singapore was to have price transparency. Much of the carbon credit trading and activity today is being conducted in what they call OTC or over-the-counter. It means it's bilateral trading, right? And on that front, there is no need to have over-disclosure on pricing. You don't know. In one of the first few months in my current job, there were people who were trying to sell me carbon credits from the same project. Somebody came at $8 per ton, somebody else came at $15 per ton. Same thing. Then you ask yourself, oh my goodness, is this kind of a situation where there is this opacity, right? So it is a little bit not transparent in the pricing. Does it help or hinder the development of a functioning carbon market? I think it hinders. And that is the reason why we decided to establish a carbon exchange to be able to have that price transparency. To your question on who sets the price, there are a few answers to that question. Firstly, there are governments that set a price because the governments obviously have a carbon tax and they determine based on their own analysis what is the pricing that's needed to shift behavior and to encourage faster decarbonization in their industries, right? They set the price through a tax. They can also control it through the allocations of permits to emit, which is the ETS kind of a system, emission trading scheme style system. The second aspect of what determines a price is really around scarcity, especially in the voluntary demands. How much of these credits are available, and if I really want it, I've got to pay more. A third determinant of pricing to some extent is actually the cost. And this is why there's sometimes variability. Clearly, to generate 1 ton from a cook stove project costs very differently to generate 1 ton from a direct air capture project. So you will never expect that a direct air capture credit will sell at the same price as a cook stove credit. And that is because of cost structure. So these are typically the 3 main drivers of pricing.
Let me add to what Frederick just said. So for example, another example that I would also want to give is on the cook stove project. So 2 different developers may be engaged in cook stove project, but one may come up with a very high environmental integrity credit compared to the other, due to the processes the project developer may have gone through. For example, a cook stove project developer may have done a KPT for the stoves, may have attached sensors to look at the number of times that cooking was done.
A KPT is a kitchen performance test.
Sorry.
So instead of using a model, they actually test how fast it takes to boil the water.
Yes. So kitchen performance test, or may have also used issues of avoided stacking, and then also well-defined geographical boundary based on the income levels. So looking at these 2 scenarios, somebody who wants a very high environmental integrity credit will go in for the one who has gone through all these processes. And such credits are quite more expensive than the other one who didn't go through all these processes. So sometimes these are some of the cost differentiations that comes in when it comes to the same projects being implemented.
So I can only take one more question because that's all the time that we have. But can we just combine maybe a few questions together? Maybe starting here all the way to the end, yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Hafsa Rizwan and I'm from Pakistan working on Article 6 and carbon market. So my question to you is that Pakistan has in place its carbon market guidelines and the green taxonomy, working on the rules and regulations and the registry. But one of the challenges we face, there are a lot of challenges, but one of the challenges is to taking the local private sector on board. They say that they are the game changer, but how I see is that they can only change the game if they come to the ground and play. But there are a lot of hindrances over there. High risk, obviously the credit value is not, it's very volatile, and the payback periods, which really makes them not to enter into the market. So I would like to ask you, the panelists, that what would you recommend, what enabling environment we can create other than these infrastructures and the guidelines and all that, which can attract and make it possible to take them on board as a major stakeholder? Thank you.
Maybe, yep, the next one. So this one talks about what are some of the factors that governments can put in place to get the private sector on board in Article 6. Next question, please.
So thanks for your sharing. My name is Wen Jiecheng. I'm a Master in Management student from China, from Tsinghua University. And I also did my internship in a UN department. It's called UNITAR. And recently we had a cooperation with the UAE Presidential Office to form a digital asset group, exchange group. So my question is, like I know like the Singapore is famous for the Web3 and the blockchain, and also this heated topic right now in Africa, also I think in Ghana. And my question is, how do you think the digital asset and the blockchain technology can contribute to the carbon market, especially in safeguarding the host country's right? Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Betty Brown from Ghana. I work with the Jospon group of companies. I just want to find out from you, I wrote down this question. In a functioning secondary carbon market, do you think from experience that hedging can control price volatilities, especially on the secondary carbon market? And then also, I want to find out from you, Sonam. Yes, you mentioned that, what's the country? Bhutan has a climate fund. I just want to find out the conditions for disbursement of these climate funds.
Lady
and then also to Julie, last question. I just want to find out, because you mentioned interministerial collaboration, how much have you spent on training staff of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on green diplomacy to help you win on the carbon market? Thank you.
So it's a related question, de-risking. I'm Chief Sustainability Officer of Convex Insurance. To what extent do you think insurance is going to be important to de-risking and allowing to scale the carbon markets, particularly the Article 6 markets?
Okay, I'm just going to summarize some of the questions that we have collected along the way. First one from Pakistan about how governments can make it more enabling for the private sector to come on board. This one I would suggest that perhaps Julie and Sonam can take the question. The second one is in relation to how digital infrastructure can help to enable carbon markets, particularly with regard to blockchain. And the third question is with regard to price volatility. How can hedging help, especially in the secondary trading markets? The fourth question is directed directly to Sonam on the Bhutan Climate Fund, your experience with the BCF. And the fifth question is in relation to Ghana, the training that's been undertaken, right, to train the foreign affairs officials for green diplomacy to kind of have an edge in some of your climate-related initiatives, particularly on Article 6 front. And is there a last question in relation to carbon insurance? What are our views on the role of carbon insurance in carbon markets, which I will invite all of us to share. So perhaps to start first question, Sonam and Julie on bringing on board the private sector.
Okay, so on the private sector front, what we did initially was to streamline the approval processes. Okay, that was the first thing that we did, to ensure that whenever we have to onboard any of the project developers, we make sure that it's well streamlined, we explain it better for them to be able to understand. Another thing that we also did was to strengthen institutional roles. So we made sure that within our framework, institutional roles are well defined there. So each of the relevant institutions, they know their roles, they know the kind of approval letters they have to issue whenever it comes to any project development. The very last thing that we also looked at is to see how there could be tax incentives, okay, for green projects. So that is also one of the areas. So for example, within the transport sector, in 2022 or 2023, the government gave a moratorium for all EVs that will be coming into the country. So those are some of the tax incentives that government also put out there to be able to support the private sector to be able to thrive within this ecosystem. That's on the private sector engagement. On the green diplomacy, we actually have a carbon market proposal for capacity building and activity sourcing, where we are engaging all those institutions that matter. We started with the main government institutions, and we haven't been able to do that kind of training for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. However, those who are really involved at the core of negotiations when it comes to tax, they are very much aware of carbon market, and they understand the processes that goes into the carbon market ecosystem. But within the entire foreign affairs as an institution, we haven't been able to build their capacity. But gradually it will get to them, yeah, because we are doing it in phases, and so it will get to them. Thank you.
Okay, I'll make it quick. In addition to what Juliana mentioned, regulatory certainty, reforms, and incentives, what we've done is also, to incentive, to really send the right signal to the private sector, we have a positive list which says these are the sectors that are open for the markets, for carbon markets. So that is one. In addition to, I'll not repeat what Juliana said, we are running out of time. On the question by a colleague from China who's working for UNITAR on blockchain and safeguarding host country rights, I think it doesn't matter whether using an Excel spreadsheet or a blockchain. At the end, the country, we have to be able to define through our policies and rules what is our rights and safeguard measures and all. So that's from our experience of building our own registry using a blockchain, that at the end you need to have your governing policies over that, and then on the Bhutan Climate Fund, I think it's one of maybe the first of its kind where it's not a buyer fund, it's a seller fund. One, it's to help there are two parts to it. One for the compliance with the Article 6 rules, and then the other is the promotional of the markets, supporting projects and so on. Yeah. So, and then it also manages the registry first. So it's actually a combination of a promotional as well as an administrator. I mean, of the regulations and all. And then I think that's about it. And insurance. I'm not from the world of insurance underwriting. I'll leave it to Frederick. He might be better in this. I mean, okay.
Let me add a few comments to some of the questions that have been posed. Other things that I think governments can do is actually to encourage price transparency. Because in the Pakistani case, right, I think in October 2023, so Saurabh here is from our carbon exchange in Singapore, CIX. We ran an auction for the Indus Blue Delta mangrove project. And it actually priced quite well. I think at about $27 US per ton or something. Yeah, $27, $29 US per ton, which was very, very good. And I think that the more that actually we encourage price transparency, the more you actually provide these price indices that will allow investors and developers to actually make more informed investment decisions on when and how to actually invest. To the question on blockchain, right? I think I will agree with Sonam. Do not worry about the technology. Worry about what it's meant to actually do. Because it is not about technology first thing. Don't have a solution looking for a problem. The question around insurance, which I can tackle quite quickly. Insurance is going to be an increasingly important part of how we think about carbon projects. Insurance against a variety of things. Reversal of LOA, which is now a required part, for example, for COSIA, right? Potential insurance against seller default risks. For example, if there are physical risks that could affect the growing of trees and all that, that would then impact the supply. So there are many angles to this. I think one of the ways to think about opportunities for insurance is to look at how carbon contracts today are being drafted. Because the amount of liquidated damages and the way that buyers are actually asking for indemnities and sellers are asking for contractual certainty are ways in which perhaps the risk can be transferred through insurance products. Away from just the investors or the developers. And I think increasingly people are prepared to pay for this kind of a coverage as we scale up. Finally, to your point, ma'am, about whether or not there's a way to hedge, clearly, it's happening today. To guard against price volatility is not just a secondary trading question. We don't know whether or not the price, hypothetically in Singapore, by 2035 will go up to $100 or $200. So in a way, many of or say in COSIA. So just like with fuel and with many other things, companies are actually engaging in long-term forward offtake agreements at a fixed price or fixed escalation of pricing in order to be able to guard against future spot price volatility. So it is already happening, and I'm sure with secondary trading, it will happen more.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to a close of this panel. Let us just put our hands together for this brilliant set of panelists. Thank you so much for your participation.